Podcasting. Let's talk all about it. In today's lesson, we're going to break down the fundamentals, a few strategies, and how to get started today with a brand new podcast that I know you're thinking about starting. You just may not know where to start, how to start, why to start, but we're going to get into all of that right now. My name is Lillian Hernandez, but you may know me as Lilly. I own Transaction Care, which is a transaction coordinator agency. I also am the host of the Keys podcast. You can learn about all of that at transactioncare.com. But for now, we're going to talk all about podcasting. This is a 3-part video series. So this part 1 will be all about the fundamentals, what to do, somewhat of a checklist on where to start, how to get going. The next episode will be all about my lessons, what I've learned in having a podcast for the last 2 years. And third will finally be deciding, should you start a podcast in the upcoming season? So let's jump into all of it. So let's get into the fun stuff. What are you going to name your podcast? Now, I have 2 thoughts about this process. And the first process is keep it simple, to the point. Make sure the name of your podcast aligns with the messaging of the show, the content of the show, and your desired outcome for every conversation that you're going to have. And like I said, I will talk about that in the second part of this video on the lessons I've learned about the podcast name that I've chosen. But for now, I highly recommend keep it simple. Make sure it's something that people can remember. It's easy to spell. It's easy to say and read. And again, make sure it aligns with you as well as your target audience. The second part of naming your podcast is don't name it. Yeah. As you're building your show, you can just start talking. You could name it after your name. You could just start creating content and building community and allow it to manifest into a podcast. But ultimately, all podcasting is you talking to a mic and it being transported out into the world through an RSS feed, allowing people to listen to what you have to say on whatever it is you're talking about. And if you're unsure about what you want to talk about or how you want to present it to the world, but you have messages on your heart that you want to just talk about, put it out there. Find your target audience as you go, because oftentimes we're just starting off solo. We have our family, we have our friends, and our small community of colleagues and coworkers, but oftentimes we don't have that reach that we desire when it comes to putting out content, putting out a show, and finding that community, that engagement, those loyal fans and supporters. So as you're building your community and finding your target audience, which is a part of the next step, is just start talking. You don't have to name the show. You could make this an interactive thing. To all your listeners out there, what should we name the show? Or maybe you're indecisive or undecided on 3 names. Allow them to vote. And then by episode 5, we'll have a name. So it gets people engaged in listening to the show. Like, oh, we got to get to episode 5 so we could name the show. And then as people are listening to the show, they could be like, oh, I was a part of naming this show, blah, blah, blah podcast, right? You could even name it blah, blah, blah podcast. Hey, I don't have a show named blah, blah, blah. So if you want to take it, it's all yours. What is a name? It's what you want it to be, or what your community wants it to be, or what it manifests into what it should be. So take those tips however you want to, but that is how I would go about naming my podcast. And again, this is all the fun stuff. We'll get into the tricky parts of it throughout this video, but for now, we're going to focus on the fun things. So next, artwork. How do you want your show to be presented? Through the cover art, through fonts, colors, all that good stuff. Will you have a slogan? Will you put your name or your face on the cover art? It's all up to you, right? It just, again, depends on your messaging. What are you trying to convey to your audience? Do you want to be the face of your brand? Do you want it to be a logo? Do you want it to be just the name of the podcast, hosted by, and then your name? It's all up to you on how you want to design your artwork, but just make sure the key word here is it is consistent, meaning colors, fonts are consistent with the way you promote it online as well, or how you present it to the world. because brand identity is key in order to build that loyal foundation of people coming to consistently listen and or watch. So make sure when you do work on your cover art that it is concise, consistent, easy to read, because remember, we're dealing with a small box when people are scrolling. So you definitely want to catch their attention, but you also don't want it to be so busy that they don't understand what they're looking at when they're on their phones, because the majority of the people listening to your show will be on their devices. And some people have the big giant IMAX Pros, some people have tiny little flip phones. So you want to make sure that it's legible from a small font perspective as well as a large font perspective if they're viewing it on their computer, an iPad, all that good stuff. And fun fact, you can now customize your artwork per episode. So for each episode, it can have its own cover art. So let's say you have a show where you interview guests and you want to put a photo of your guest on the cover art, you can. So this is a brand new feature that just unveiled, I believe, this year. So play with it however you want. But again, the keyword is consistency. You want to make sure that the art matches the original art so people can, again, have that brand awareness and associate this font, this style of lettering or logo with the same podcast if you are going to customize each podcast with a different cover art. So remember that. How to make the cover art. Again, this is the fun stuff. You can play with Canva. You can design it on your own if you have those skills. I personally do not have those skills, so I rely heavily on Canva. There are a lot of, you can type in the words podcast template, and it gives you a bunch of different ideas and ways to formulate your podcast art, fonts, designs, logos, text, all of that, sizing. There's a variety of options. I highly recommend you spend some time on the app and choose wisely. If you have the budget, you can also outsource and hire someone to do it. But honestly, if you're just getting started and you're still trying to find your loyal community, fan base, audience, I wouldn't spend too much time on the artwork so much as I would just getting the word out there and having just a simple design so people can recognize your name and start listening. But as you grow, you can evolve, you can change the name, you can change the fonts. But for now, I would just keep it as simple as possible without having to get tangled in the minuscule details, such as hiring someone, finding the budget to hire someone, because hiring someone doesn't guarantee that it's going to look great. I've done plenty of work on Canva on my own without the expertise that has worked for me. So again, keep it simple. You can even just design it on your own. You don't have to even pay for a logo. You can just find ways to create it within the app, hire someone, or design it yourself. It's all up to you on how you want to present it. It could even just be a blank color. That's what I mean by simplicity. We don't have to overthink any of this process. Just keep it simple. When you think about cover art, I associate it with music albums and how we have iconic albums. Like, I'm a big Beyonce fan. So if you are a Beyonce fan, you know her self-titled album was a black background and her name Beyonce in pink. And I think it was like the most simplest Helvetica or whatever those simple fonts are, and just her name in bold pink font in the center of the page. And that was it. And it is one of her most iconic albums ever. So we don't have to overthink these things. We can just keep it as simple as possible. We're not out here to win any art cover competitions, unless you are. I'm not aware of any, but if there are out there, do you. But if you're just getting started out, keep it simple. Silly. KISS. Next up, we want to focus on our target audience. And we'll get into the more technical things towards the end of this podcast. But for now, I want you guys to focus on these top 3 main things: is the name of the show, your artwork, and who you're going to be speaking to. This is key. So when it comes to your target audience, it all starts with, why do you want a podcast? Getting to know who you are as a podcast host and understanding the responsibility that you do have as a host, because it's all fun and games until you get canceled. Not that I wish that upon anyone, but 3 things you have to realize as a podcast host. You will be celebrated, challenged, and condemned. There's a few things in between that could occur as well, and you may not experience any of those. But there is a responsibility that you hold when you decide to turn on the camera, speak your mind, share your opinions, give advice, whatever the case may be. And I trust that you all understand that and are mature enough to face whatever comes your way, no matter what you say, because everything is interpreted differently. Some may think what I'm saying is evil, and my intentions are not anywhere near being evil or trying to hurt anyone. But everything is up for interpretation once it goes public. So I know we're kind of talking about all the fun stuff, but I do want to emphasize a little bit about the responsibility when it comes to having your target audience and who you're speaking to. So when you are ready to start a podcast, get to know who your target audience member is, or your community. And what I suggest is you start with yourself. Who are you in this space? How are you going to facilitate these messages? What are the messages? And what are your desired outcomes as a result of you speaking into a camera, into a mic on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis? We'll talk about frequency in just a bit. Again, let's reiterate, why are you podcasting? What do you want to accomplish? What value will you be providing? And building community is key. So you can think about, what is your why? What is your mission statement? What are your values? And what are the key pillars or topics that you want to focus on throughout this show? That way you don't get so overwhelmed thinking that you have to talk about everything that is related to real estate, or everything that is related to food content, or everything that is related to dance content. Whatever your show is going to be about, you can really break down and go super niche in terms of topics and conversations, and then build on and expand as you go. But in the beginning, simplicity is key to consistency. Again, simplicity is key to consistency. And for me, I have found that knowing my why is the foundation that I need to springboard off of, to stay focused, to stay in alignment with the messages and the value that I will be providing via my show. So if you do the same, it'll be a lot easier to structure your content, your outlines, your scripts, and move forward from there. Because with that said, then you want to get into your format. And what I mean by format, I mean, how will you be presenting your show to the world? Will you be doing audio and visual? Will it be audio visual transcript, meaning in written form, the copy? You could make that into a blog post. Also, frequency. How often will you be presenting this show? Will you be presenting this show on a daily basis? Because there are some podcasts that produce shows daily. Will you do it on a weekly basis, a bi-weekly basis, a monthly basis, a quarterly basis? Or will you create a series of podcast episodes, meaning these 10 episodes will be focused on this one topic, or maybe seasons of a podcast. Season 1, season 2 will have, and you choose the number. It could be 7 episodes, it could be 3 episodes, it could be 20 episodes. It's all up to you. Again, it all comes down to this: consistency. Choose a day or days when you will release your show and stick to those times and days. And if you are interested in statistics and stats and whatnot, I would do some research on when your target audience is most active on social media, most active maybe on their commute. So you maybe want to do a morning podcast and really emphasize, when you're promoting your show, on your morning commute, listen to blah, blah, blah podcast, right? So, or when you're cooking dinner with the family, this is the best time to listen to my show. Again, we're getting into the little tips and tricks, but I just wanted to throw that out there. When it comes to formatting your podcast, there's a couple ways that you can go about it. Choosing the type of podcast you'll have, how frequently it will be presented. And then when it does come to actually formatting the podcast, meaning how will you lay out your outline? Will you freestyle it? Will you have notes? Will you have a script with a teleprompter? Will you be interviewing people? That's another aspect of the show. Will you have a co-host? Will you have several hosts? What is their schedule when it comes to recording? Consistency is key in all of these elements, no matter what you decide to do. Consistency is key, and make sure there's someone taking the lead and that you're all on the same page when you do invite others into this space in podcasting. Check in with them. What is their why? Why do they want a podcast? Is it to impact and help others in this category? Is it to make a lot of money? Is it to eventually host a show on a network? Whatever their goals are, whatever your goals are, make it known and communicate that to each other, especially when you do bring on co-hosts or guest hosts. It's okay to get familiar with other people, and it doesn't have to get too deep, but I do feel like the show will have more impact and commitment when everyone is on the same page and same accord. And, do check-ins, whether it's monthly, quarterly, with each other, so you guys can make sure you're always on the same page. Because one thing I realized with a lot of podcasts lately is people just turn on the camera, turn on the mics, and just start talking. And they'll either get so big to the point where they're still operating from their day one why and their day one wants and needs and desired outcomes, that they didn't change that whole concept once they reached certain milestones. So also take note of, what milestones do you want to achieve? Listenership, demographics, locations. Do you want to make this a thing where you go on tour? Or will this also just be exclusive to your clients? You don't have to make your podcast public. I should have noted that in the beginning. Your podcast can very much be private and used as a lead magnet to garner more clients in terms of, here are 10 fundamental steps for real estate first-time home buyers, or something like that, to that effect. And it's your podcast with visuals or just audio, so your clients can listen to that as they're filling out their contracts or writing offers or signing disclosures, because it's overwhelming. So again, your podcast can be public and it can be private. It could be held within a paywall community. It's all up to you. That's the beauty of this form of media, is it's all based on how you want to create it and present it to the world. The next part of it I want to talk about is the length of your podcast. When you're first putting out a podcast, you definitely want to stay ahead, meaning once you plan out your shows, don't just put out one episode and then see what happens next. Record, I would say 3 to 5 episodes right out the gate and have them scheduled ahead of time. So then that way you create a gap in between your creative process, the process of seeing how people are absorbing the information. If they are, then great. If they're not, then you're going to need to adjust your strategy. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, again, consistency is key, because right out the gate, an intro. Who are you? What is the show about? How frequently can they expect episodes? How can they reach you? Do you have a website? What's your email? All that good stuff, social media accounts. And that can be a minute or less, 5 minutes if you want. But after that, you want to drop your episode 1. And then once you have your episode 1, soon after episode 2 comes out, you could drop them back to back. In fact, when I first dropped my podcast, I released the intro, episode 1, and episode 2 all on the same day. Wasted no time. So then that way I knew I had people, that way I knew people had something to go to next that was from me, rather than listening and saying, oh, good job, Lil. Especially if it's like family or friends or people you're just talking to, you want to reel them in, build that trust, build that brand recognition, that voice recognition, versus that's awesome, she dropped a podcast, and then they forget all about you. And then the process of having more podcasts after that. And again, I would recommend dropping at least 2 to 3 that first week, and then having something scheduled immediately for whenever you decide to drop your next podcast. So that way, one, because you've been preparing and planning for this for weeks, months, days, I don't know how long. So you're going to need a breather once it gets released, because that's a whole new emotion that it's a whole new set of emotions that you will experience once your work, your art was once private now gets released to the public. That was something I didn't prepare for, was again the celebrations, the challenging, and the condemning. It all just it's a world of emotions that you will experience. So give yourself a gap and some space in between the creation process, the publishing process, and then the processing process. The processing process, processing your emotions, people's reactions, your reactions, the reception, all of that. Give yourself some time. But again, having that gap and that space in between your first few episodes will give you time to create the next series of episodes that you want to do. And of course, you can batch record, you can schedule where you already have 10 episodes in the can. And if you want to just release 10 episodes throughout the whole year, then boom, your first season is done. Again, keep it simple, keep it light. You don't have to come out the gate, super hard, because you will burn out quickly. And if you're doing this all by yourself, again, work, there will be times to push, and then there will be times to rest. If you're in a season of push, make sure you're scheduling rest. That's how longevity is built, through rest and sleep. And making sure you're hydrated, eating properly, because once, the lights, camera, action can be very deceiving. And if you put all this work in and then no one watches it or no one listens to it, that's a part of the process that you will have to embrace and take as feedback. And again, I will talk about this in when it comes to the mistakes I've made, but just know that if you get 50 downloads, which basically means anytime someone hits play, that is counted as a download. Even if they only listened to 1 second or the whole entire episode, it is considered a download. So 50 downloads is pretty standard for the first week of downloads. 20 is amazing. 0 is sad, because you put in all this work and you want people to listen, but it's like, just use it as feedback. Okay, what did I not do? You definitely want to exhaust all of your options before you just go on to the next episode. Because then you can say, oh, I never sent an email. Let me text my family and friends my podcast for them to share. Let me tag people so they can repost it on their stories on Instagram. Let me make some more clips. Let me hire someone to run my social media for the next month. That's what I have the budget for. Just use that as feedback. And if you do have milestones and goals that you want to hit, again, you can keep track of them, but don't get lost in the numbers. Remember your why, because if you get caught up in the numbers and the money, you're going to be disappointed every single time, because you're always going to be chasing. When it's like, why did you start this from the beginning? And remember that. And then you can adjust accordingly as you go, but commit to consistency, commit to authenticity, commit to longevity. And again, if this is just a season in your life, have fun. Have fun either way. This is fun. This is fun. Podcasting, creating content is fun. So I hope you also enjoy the process as you go. There's a few more things I do want to talk about, like recording, editing, and getting your podcast out to the public. So let's run through those real quickly before we end this episode and then go into the next lesson. Okay, when it comes to distributing your podcast, you want to find a good host. I use Buzzsprout. I've been using the entire 2 years that I've had a podcast. So I enjoy using them, but again, you can do your own due diligence and research and find a host that lines up with you. I pay around, at the time of this filming, it's 2024. I pay about $12 a month for, I think, 3 hours of space. So I can upload 3 hours of content. It could be 3 1-hour episodes. It could be 100 3-minute I'm doing the math all wrong, but you get the idea. 12, 10-minute. You get the idea. 3 hours worth of content can be as many episodes as you want as long as you stay within that time frame for the month. You can also obviously upgrade to more time, but more time equals more money. But I love it because it's easy to use, it's easy to read your stats, it's affordable. And I upload my podcast there and it distributes it out to all of the major platforms like Apple, Spotify, Pandora, YouTube. You can connect your YouTube channel to it as well. So if you are someone that has visuals, it's all connected. When it comes to equipment, like your microphone, I'm using a Blue Yeti, which I got for Christmas. If you're watching this, I'm showing it in the camera. I don't know if it's in focus, but you can do that. You can also get one of these little $10 wireless mics. Make sure they're charged up so the sound isn't bad and that you don't move it around or have it dangling next to jewelry. That way the sound quality will be good. If you do want to use a camera, I have one of these fancy Canon EOS. I forgot what kind of Canon it is, but you can do that, get an external mic and just record like that. But honestly, our phones are capable of doing so much. Our phones, whether you have an iPhone or an Android, just pick up the phone, hit record. And then in order to edit your podcast, I use GarageBand for the audio. And if I'm doing video, I use an app called InShot because I know my podcasts aren't going to be more than typically an hour. The longest I think I've had was like an hour and a half. So I make sure I pick a simple editing app because I'm not a professional editor and I don't have the budget at the moment for an editor. And honestly, if you do have the budget for an editor, I highly recommend you get one because editing is the most difficult part of this whole creative process. And honestly, editing can kind of take away the joy from the creative process. So if you can afford to hire someone, I recommend it. And you may have to go through several editors before you find the one. But if it's something simple, you're just talking to a camera, a couple edits here and there, do it yourself. But if it's something a little bit more elaborate, it can take up to 3 hours to edit a 30-minute podcast, or video. So be mindful of that. And I do recommend if you have the budget to hire an editor. And there are plenty of videos on YouTube that you can watch that have tutorials on how to edit and learn how to edit. That's how I learned. Simply YouTube University. I just got online, Googled how to edit a video, how to edit a podcast. And I asked friends who had podcasts, what are you doing? I read a lot of blogs. I watched videos like this and just sat down with it and applied it. I just took action immediately. As soon as I learned something, I applied it to a video. And, down to like the lighting, the microphone, the sound, the background. I'm still learning as I go. But the fun thing about it all is that the information is unlimited online. You just have to Google it, search it, YouTube it, and find it and learn it. And if you want to reach out to me for more tips, of course you can reach out to me and we can go about creating a plan for you to have a successful podcast in the future. Finally, for this series of how to start a podcast for beginners, once you've gotten your name, the artwork, what you're going to be talking about, who you're going to be talking about it with. Is it going to be solo? Is it going to be guests? Will you have a co-host? How will you distribute it? All of that good stuff and in all the in-between. Now it's time to publish it, have it go live, promote it consistently throughout every area where you know your target audience will exist. You can even use schedulers like later.com. Canva also has a built-in scheduler. Oh, speaking of scheduling and editing, rewind, Opus Clips has been a savior for my podcast and for my content. So once I have a video published, I can take the whole video, feed it into Opus Clips. Yes, you do have to pay for more time, but there is a free option. And that will generate clips for you. Of course, it's an AI tool, so you want to make sure you're reading what the text is saying, watch the clip, and then schedule it within the app. Of course, you do have to pay for it, but I have seen a significant difference with my time management using apps like Opus Clips. And then also, if you want to, there are plenty of other apps as well where you can edit within the app, where it'll take away filler words like Descript.com. There was a point when I was using that as well. If you're someone that stumbles with their words, or don't want to look at a screen the whole time, you can download teleprompters apps that you can use to just read while you're speaking to the camera. So again, keep it simple. Just make sure you're consistent, sticking to your why and your mission, your values, your key pillars. And then once you start promoting your podcast, your audience will find you. Focus on keywords, search engine optimization, commenting back, engaging with people, asking questions, asking for feedback. It's a big job. Podcasting is a job in itself. So keep that in mind as well as you're going about doing this. If you find yourself overwhelmed, because if you're going to be adding this into your life, make sure that, there will be opportunity costs. So audit your life and make sure, find the time and the space where it's going to fit there, and leave it there until you have to adjust. And of course, if you want to build a website, you can. Make sure you have your contact information in the description of every episode so people know how to reach you in case they want you to be a guest on their podcast, or maybe they want to be a guest on your podcast, or maybe they want to book you for a specific event. Make sure your name, email, website are all in the description. Social media, of course. If you don't have a website, buy the domain. I should have said this in the beginning, but in order to choose your name, make sure that the domain is available, or a very close iteration of it. So for instance, I have the Keys podcast as my URL, and I had transactioncarepodcast.com when it was called the Transaction Care Podcast. So that's all a part of the research when you're building out your website. Is it available? Is it trademarked? Is someone else using it? So make sure you're doing your due diligence as well, but also make sure people have a way of contacting you. Maybe they want one-on-one coaching, or they want lessons on what you're doing. If you're doing like a dance or a food podcast, whatever the case may be, make sure people have a way to reach you consistently, because you never know where your next opportunities or blessings are going to come from. And then as you continue to grow your audience and your supporters, you can start thinking about other things. And, you can start thinking about things like merch, maybe a private community, paid private community for people to, a smaller group of people to have access to you on a more intimate level, like a Patreon or something of that nature. You can start selling other services, whether it's coaching, lessons, guest appearances, keynotes, the list goes on and on. Maybe you'll host a conference. Maybe you will have that show on network TV. Either way, you have to do the thing to get to the thing. So I hope you found value in this video. I took my notes, and if you want these notes, just visit transactioncare.com. Everything will live there for now unless otherwise noted, but everything will live on my website, transactioncare.com. And this is truly just a few fundamentals and how I've managed to start my podcast, and the outline and the checklist that I followed throughout the way. And I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions, my name is Lillian Hernandez. Feel free to comment. If you want one-on-one coaching with me, you can email me, tc@transactioncare.com, and I'll be glad to help and connect with you. And let's get these podcasts going, guys. You got this. I believe in you. Trust yourself as well. Don't forget to trust yourself and have fun. But until then, care for yourself, care for your wealth. Your time is worth it. Let's coordinate. Talk soon.